Hey everybody, welcome. Hi Simona. Hi all. Hi Lisa. Welcome to your first Periscope. I'm gonna wait till everybody joins, as I know it's 8:30 right on the dot. For those of you who are just joining, my name is Liz. I am a fitness and food coach based in Manhattan. I'm here in my kitchen tonight. Hi Chad, welcome. You might have seen me post on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook earlier that today's Wellness Wednesday post is going to be about what I call the great carb debate. So kind of want to talk about the big, the big W's and the H in terms of what kind of carbs, when you should have them, why you should have them. Yes, I love carbs too, Lisa, and there's a reason for that, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. And how you should have them and all that. So thanks so much for joining me this evening. As a fitness and food coach, hi there, Dave. Hi, Patricia, so excited to see you. So as a fitness and food coach, I get tons of questions from my clients. Are carbs good? Are they bad? What type should I have? Gluten, no gluten, sugar, all that good stuff. Sorry, I'm a little blind. Hi, oh, hey there. Hi all. Oh, I'm so excited to see all you. I'm sorry, I need to wear my glasses because I can't see from this far away. So carbs, yeah, definitely up for debate, and we're going to be just talking about a kind of one aspect of it. So I'm not going to be covering things like wheat and gluten so much. More so, what are carbs? Why do we need them? More or less how we know how much we need them. But I think a really significant portion of carbohydrates in diet is when we have them and why we have them. So I think that's what a lot of different diets and nutrition strategies might be missing. If you've ever read a fitness magazine or a health magazine, this kind of drives me nuts. I'm all about the kind of misconceptions lately in health and fitness. I feel like what I always read when I see a diet plan, first of all, it's somewhere between 1,500 and 1,800 calories, which is absurd. Yes, time and quantity, we're definitely gonna be talking about that. But, whenever you read a diet plan in like a popular magazine or you're hearing kind of a spokesperson talk, we are definitely going to talk about carbs after 8 p.m. Thank you for reminding me about that. But in terms of just what you might see, in a magazine or in popular culture in terms of diet and carbs, it's always about limiting the number of calories, and the carbs that you have, they should always be whole grains, like things like wheat bread and stuff like that. I feel like the quintessential sort of post-workout snack is a wheat bread sandwich with peanut butter and banana, which is so wrong, it's not even funny, but we're not going to talk about that tonight, maybe another time. And also that you should eat your carbs earlier in the day so you can burn them off. That's what I hear about all the time. Let me know if you guys have ever read that or thought that or tried that yourself, or if that's something that you adhere to. Someone just asked about carbs after 8 p.m. I will talk about that for a second in terms of timing. We have a 24-hour clock, but that's a man-made convention, and everyone's lifestyle is a little bit different. If you're someone who has like a shift job and you have to work overnight, or maybe you just might be like me, be a trainer and be up really time for when you should have stop having carbs or even stop eating. I would say you want to keep a couple hours before you and your bedtime in terms of consuming food at all, just because it's going to, trying to digest while you sleep on a heavy stomach is often going to prevent you from sleeping soundly. So the 8 p.m. thing, that's kind of like an arbitrary number. I would say whatever your bedtime is, give yourself an hour or two. There is something I'll talk about another time on another Periscope about actually having a kind of carbohydrate and protein rich snack, small snack right before bed or close to bed. That's for another reason. But again, you shouldn't be having any giant meals, right before bed. So carbs after 8 p.m., the answer is it kind of depends on what your lifestyle and your schedule is like. You definitely don't want to have a huge meal anytime super close to bedtime. But we'll get back to sort of like when we should have carbs and when we shouldn't have carbs. So first of all, in case you don't actually know, which is possible, hi Kayla, carbs are a macronutrient, just like fats or protein. And macronutrients, they basically means large nutrients, and we can't produce them in our own body, so we have to consume them. The amount of carbs you should have, or protein or fat, is going to completely vary from person to person, your lifestyle, your activity, all that stuff. So if you were hoping that I'd give you like an exact number of carbs to have per day, you're not going to get that. So you can just shut this off right away if you thought that's what was going to happen. So carbs are made up of sugars, starches, and cellulose, which is basically fiber. So different carbs, whether we're talking about carrots and sweet potatoes or whole wheat bread or chocolate candy, you know, the exact amount of starches, sugars, and fibers will vary. You definitely want to find carbs that are higher in fiber and lower in sugar when possible for the most part, because fiber has all sorts of other benefits like, you know, dealing with cholesterol and fullness and all that other stuff. Where we find carbs tends to be in whole foods like fruits and vegetables, whole grains, and you'll also find carbs in dairy because dairy has lactose, which is a milk sugar. Anytime you hear something with like OSC or ASC or OSC or certain OSE, excuse me, at the end, like maltose or lactose, that means it's a type of sugar. Lactose just means dairy sugar. So if you were to read kind of what the recommended daily allowance of carbohydrates is for people according to, you know, the FDA, general, you know, medical suggestions, it's going to be somewhere around 135 grams a day. So that being said, people can absolutely consume more carbs than that per day, and they can absolutely consume less carbs than that per day. I mean, depending on what my training and my schedule is like, I'm somewhere around 100 grams a day, more or less, just it depends. And that's what I found that I feel good with. That's kind of the bottom line with all this stuff. You guys are going to have to try and see what works for you. So it depends on a lot of things like your ethnicity, the way you were raised, your activity level. Sometimes people think your blood type has something to do with it, the rest of your diet, whether or not you're sedentary. All that stuff is going to, you know, affect what your macronutrient intake should look like. Hi, Maria. Thanks for joining. So, like I said, the general recommendation according to popular medical research and all that stuff is 135 grams. I don't think, or I don't coach people in terms of, you know, those sorts of man-made constituents like grams or calories, right? Because that's just something that we created, that we impose on food. I'm much more interested in you figuring out what kinds of foods and what quantities and what combinations work for you based on, like I said, your lifestyle and all that other stuff. So why do we need carbs? And I'm not going to talk anything really about things like super low carb diets or keto diets. That's not my expertise in terms of the diet as a whole. Certainly people can thrive on that. And again, that has a lot to do with your lifestyle and all that stuff. But carbohydrates act as fuel for your central nervous system. So that means, you know, your brain specifically. It also acts as fuel for your muscles. It's energy for your muscles, and it also has to do with things like memory and cognition in terms of how your central nervous system functions. So when you are trying to decide what type of carbs to have, I'm always going to err on the side, again, of whole foods. So I don't care if you have a gluten problem or you don't have a gluten problem, okay? Or you think you have a gluten problem. Getting carbohydrates from something, and I'll talk about my favorites, but getting carbs from something like a sweet potato or even a regular potato, in my opinion, based on the research I've done, is probably going to be a better choice than whole wheat bread, gluten-free bread made with a bunch of different flours, you know, anything that's more processed. The definition of the word process in terms of food, I mean, if I take an apple and I cut it up, that is processing it, right? So earlier I had dessert and I just took an apple, I chopped it up, I cooked it in a pan with some ghee, which is clarified butter, a little cinnamon, little walnuts. It was like a deconstructed apple cobbler. It was freaking delicious. Now, is that as processed as an apple pie? 1000% not. Does it remind me sort of apple pie and taste delicious? Great, yes, but I feel good. I feel okay. Turtles, I really don't have an opinion on turtles, but thanks for asking. Anyway, so in terms of processing, I'm always going to suggest having a carb that's less processed than more processed. So erring on the sides of things like fruits and vegetables. If you find that grains work for you, fine. Quinoa, rice, even gluten-containing grains like barley, you know, having whole barley, I feel is going to be a better option than something like bread made with barley or pasta or cookies, right? I think sometimes we hop on these sort of health fads and try to, you know, convince ourselves of something. So whether you are celiac or gluten intolerant or gluten sensitive, or you just don't like gluten, you have a personal vendetta against gluten, you're probably going to be better off choosing your carbs from sources, like I said, things like starchy vegetables and fruits, than gluten-free bread, right? I tend to avoid gluten. I've noticed it doesn't make me feel great. I'm not I haven't been diagnosed as celiac. That's just something that I've observed, and I encourage you to do the same. But I also don't feel great when I eat gluten-free bread or gluten-free pasta. I'll do it sometimes because, again, I haven't been diagnosed with a specific illness, but I notice how that affects my body, and I make the conscious choice to eat something like that because it's delicious and it's a special occasion, or I just really want it, and I'm going to be conscious about that decision. So I'm always going to suggest kind of you being more in tune with your body and doing what works for you. And if you make a choice to the contrary of that, you just have to deal with the consequences and move on. There's no berating, there's no, beating yourself up. You just have to make conscious choices every day to step yourself toward being more healthy versus being less healthy. So that's my little side note about that. So what happens when you don't have enough carbs for you and whatever that amount might be? So when you don't eat enough carbs, your body and your brain needs to get that fuel elsewhere. So what is going to happen is that your adrenal glands, yes, loads of anti-nutrients in lots of gluten-free foods. Thank you for commenting on that, Maria. I'm sorry, I can't see from this far away, but yeah, and anti-nutrients are another whole thing. They're basically molecules and nutrients in foods that kind of counteract any benefit. So for example, spinach has something called oxalates, which actually binds to certain minerals and depletes them from your system. So raw spinach in your smoothie is actually probably not the best idea. Cooked spinach is a little bit better. That's just a little sidebar on anti-nutrients and what those are. There's still a lot of research going on that. But Maria's point was, just because something's gluten-free doesn't mean that it's healthy, or doesn't mean that it's the best option for you. You have to make the conscious decision. You can't do something that just, your friend did and it worked for her. You actually have to tune into your body and kind of do a little self exploration and reflection and be honest with yourself, right? So that's what I have to say about that. So carbs, why you need them, what happens if you don't have enough. Your adrenals will release cortisol. And if you haven't heard of cortisol, it's also known as the stress hormone. It's a hormone that we need. The kind of quintessential example is fight or flight. So if it was still caveman times and I was being chased by a bear, cortisol would be released. I'd be able to hopefully sprint away from that bear and save myself. The problem is with our kind of constant levels of stress that we have now from things like not sleeping enough, being addicted to technology, just kind of not finding ways to decompress, so not finding ways to relax and unwind and disengage from kind of the high stress of our life, we sort of have elevated levels of cortisol all the time of varying degrees, and that's not a good thing. We want cortisol in a pinch when we need it, when there's an emergency, right, when something traumatic is happening and we really need to kind of get into go mode, but we don't need that all the time. Cortisol has some nasty side effects in terms of screwing up with your sleep. It also has a large effect on where you deposit and how you deposit fat. So it's very closely related to depositing fat around your midsection, which is not any place that anyone I know wants extra cushion for the push-in. So if you've been, trying different diet methods or different fitness workouts and you're really, you really feel that you're being diligent and you're not seeing results, and this is a whole other big conversation, but it could very well be tied to your hormones. So I do just want to mention this book that I read a while ago really turned me on to all this information. It's called the Adrenal Reset Diet. It's by a chiropractor. Your adrenals, again, are glands that produce hormones, and a lot of us have kind of constant stress to our adrenals and constant extra hormones that we don't need or misbalanced hormones running around in our system. So if this is of interest to you, this is a really easy read to kind of maybe figure out what might work for you. So when you have extra cortisol running through your system, this is how cortisol is supposed to work, okay? So in the morning, your cortisol level is supposed to be high. Chiropractic is key to cortisol reduction. Yeah, so chiropractors versus other doctors, in some cases, tend to be a little bit more in tune to things like nutrition and how your nervous system affects, the rest of your life versus just like looking at like, okay, my shoulder hurts, so I'm going to treat my shoulder. Different practitioners like chiropractors, acupuncturists, functional doctors, hi there, welcome. They tend to be a little bit more in tune to this. So that book, The Adrenal Reset Diet, The Adrenal Reset Diet was written by a chiropractor, and it does talk about hormones and how it affects your health. So that is definitely something you can look into. And as I mentioned, if you happen to be, trying really hard to reach some health goals and it's not working out for you, I would say you might want to take a closer look at your hormones, and that might mean you have to visit an endocrinologist. That might mean you just start to kind of pay attention to yourself a little bit more, notice your sleep patterns, your wake cycle, and all that stuff. Hi there. So cortisol, that fight or flight hormone, should be highest in the morning when you wake up. And kind of a way to figure that out is if you're able to wake up without an alarm, or you don't need to hit the snooze button so many times, you feel kind of more refreshed. That's a good indication that your cortisol level might be, in the right place. Another indication is that as the day goes on, your energy starts to wax and wane a little bit, and stays that way. Sometimes people kind of have a slump in the afternoon and then a surge. That's another indication either that you're over caffeinating or that your hormones might be a little out of balance. But you want your cortisol level to be highest at the beginning of the day and then to go down. Last, or 2 periscopes ago, I talked about melatonin. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense when you think about it, right? Like, we make this way more confusing. Certainly there's some science behind it that might be new to you, but when you really break it down into the nuts and bolts, it's not that confusing. Like, we're kind of doing this to ourselves. So I talked about melatonin last Wednesday, I believe, in terms of sleep. So you probably are familiar with melatonin supplements as an over-the-counter way to kind of, thank you, but over-the-counter the way to try to help regulate your sleep. Last week I mentioned that's not my favorite way. Hi, Russia. Melatonin's not my favorite, or melatonin supplementation just, on your own is not my favorite way for you to try to regulate your sleep, because you just don't know where your levels are. And melatonin's technically a hormone. So, if you're just willy-nilly taking melatonin, you might get to sleep. You might even stay asleep a little bit longer than you think, but you just don't really know if you're not fixing anything. You're just kind of putting a Band-Aid on it. So cortisol should be highest in the morning and then go down, and the inverse of that is melatonin should be low in the morning, so you should be awake and alert and energized, and it should go up as the day goes on. So again, you're going to be prepared for bed. Doing these periscopes before bed kind of get me jazzed up. So right after this, I have to make sure I kind of wind down so I'm all set for bed. So when you're not having enough carbs, so tying cortisol back into carbs, yes, it has to do with your diet 100%. When you're not having enough carbs, and I can't tell you what that is because everyone's different and it totally depends on your lifestyle and your activity and all this other stuff, your adrenals push out more cortisol so that glucose can be released from the muscles and the liver. So glucose is the storage form of carbs that we keep in our body. No matter what carbs you're having, whether it's a sweet potato or a chocolate cake, it's going to be reduced down to glucose in your body. And so for the ultra runners, so I'm not talking about specific demographics. Again, I'm not, an expert on what an ultra runner should eat. Theoretically, they should have more carbohydrates, but there's a lot of people that do just fine without it. I mean, it really depends on, you have to kind of self-test more than anything else. You also have to be smart. If you're running extra long distances, and that's considered more of an endurance sport versus a high intensity activity, you are going to be burning carbs, and you will need to replenish that glycogen after a workout. After any workout that's mildly intense, so not yoga, for example, or not an easy yoga class, but after most workouts, you're going to want to replenish with protein and carbohydrates, which I'll talk about more another time. That's why a whole wheat sandwich with peanut butter and banana is not my favorite post-workout snack, because whole wheat's pretty processed, as we talked about. Peanut butter, although it does have protein, is high in fat, and fat is not something you want to have right after a workout. You pretty much can have it throughout the day otherwise for most people, but not after a workout, because it's going to stop kind of that regeneration that you want, that glycogen restoration and the repair of the muscles that you need with protein. And bananas, although they are a good source of carbs, they're also a high source of fructose, which is a specific type of sugar. And thank you, I appreciate that. It's exactly, well, it's not that you don't want fat after a workout so much. I mean, a little bit's not gonna really, impede so much, but, things like nut butters or coconut or avocado. I see a lot of people posting avocado smoothie post-workout. That's not really what you want. It might be better for a snack or breakfast or something like that, but just in terms of the timing, which I'll get into in a second. So I just want to kind of finish my thought about bananas and fructose. Fructose post-workout, so fruit post-workout is not your best option. I think I'm going to do a longer Periscope on kind of pre-post-workout foods and what types of carbs, but you know, fruit's not bad for you. I'm not saying that by any stretch of the imagination, but post-workout, in terms of how your body processes fructose, so sugar from fruit, it's going to be stored by the liver as fat a little bit more than other types of carbs. So I'll get to what I think is a good kind of post-workout or good carbohydrate options. So like I said, if you're not consuming enough carbs based on your needs, your cortisol levels are going to raise. That adds to things like abdominal fat and unstable sleep patterns and just stress overall. So that's why you want to make sure you have, you know, the right amount of carbs. And the only way you can really figure that out, I mean, there's tests you can sort of do, but they're not that reliable, is really just trial and error by yourself. So when you can kind of tell that your carbohydrate levels as well as your cortisol levels might be a little bit off if your sleep's off. Let's see, I'm trying to think what else I wanted to mention. Like I said, weight gain around your abdominal region, and just kind of like stress overall. If you're feeling like in your workouts you're not having enough energy, that's another good indication that maybe you might not be, you might not be resting properly and recovering, but you also might not be replenishing post-workout. So bottom line here, you do need carbohydrates. What types of carbs you need is going to depend on you and your lifestyle. The types of carbs you should have, I'm always going to suggest whole foods. Thank you. Whole foods, more like fruits and vegetables, dairy if that works for you, whole grains if those work for you, no problem. And now I'm going to tell you a few of my favorite carbs, specifically for post-workout. So like I mentioned, a banana, an apple, not necessarily the best idea post-workout, great for a snack. But here are a few of my favorites. So very seasonally appropriate, pumpkin. So organic canned pumpkin, good amount of fiber, pretty low on the sugar, and super high in things like vitamin A, as well as some iron as well. So you could make a smoothie. One of my favorite things to do is to make a smoothie with organic canned pumpkin, water, or if you like almond milk or dairy milk is cool. Goes really well with both chocolate and vanilla, protein powder, or if that's what you use. And that's kind of like a great option post-workout. You can make things like oatmeal with this and chia pudding and all sorts of things. It's really good to bake with too. Another kind of different carb that I like to use are plantains, or when I'm lazy, plantain chips. So again, this is another good source of various minerals and vitamins like vitamin A and vitamin C, good amount of carbs. And I mean, these are processed, these are chips, but the only ingredients is plantains, oil and sea salt. I tend to try to make my own plantain chips, but if you're trying to stay away from things like bread and pasta, but you want to supplement your carbs, this is a good option. And finally, again, very seasonal here are beets. So these are actually pre-packaged beets. I do make them myself, but I know some of you guys, yes, exactly. What you do want to be careful about the oils. Topic for another Periscope, but just talking about carbs right here. So these are organic cooked beets. They're already peeled, which is the most pain in the butt part of it. This week I've been having a salad with, you know, mixed greens and beets and goat cheese and some walnuts. I think that's it. Oh, and chicken. So beets are another great carbohydrate option. So kind of tying into what we talked about, or someone mentioned in the beginning, like when should you have your carbs? And then I'm going to wrap this up. Popular culture, popular suggestions say eat your carbs in the morning, have low carb at night, so you can burn your carbs off during the day. But going back to what I was saying, remember what I was saying about cortisol? So, and if your carbs are too low, your cortisol is going to be too high. So in order to try to actually affect that, what you want to do is actually have less carbs in the beginning of the day and more carbs at the end of the day. So I'm just going to let you kind of listen to that. Less carbs toward the beginning of the day, more carbs toward the end of the day. That, I am not saying go make a whole box of pasta and eat it right now. That is not what I just said. So, an example, what I might eat. I might have some eggs with kale and some chicken sausage for breakfast. And then for lunch, I might have, like I just mentioned, I had a mixed green salad with chicken and goat cheese and some beets. So that's a good source of carbs, and some walnuts. And then in the afternoon, I might have, I've liking lately like an apple with some prosciutto and some of these really good olives. Yes, to answer your question, kale does have oxalates. That goes back to the anti-nutrients. For those of you who are following along, cooking kale will reduce that, and you know, you want to cook it lightly. But everything, you know, everything's going to have pluses and minuses. There's really no perfect food except maybe water, but even water, you know, we have all these issues with. So you want to think about what your goals are. You know, if you have issues, so like if you're concerned about things like goiters or thyroid issues, you might want to reduce the amount of kale and other cruciferous vegetables. If that's not a concern for you, that's fine. But also like what you like. I genuinely, you might think I'm weird, really like kale. Like I don't really like spinach that much. I actually hate raw spinach. I like to cook spinach, for example. So like if I like kale and the rest of my diet, you know, I'm not eating nothing but kale and cabbage all the time, I should be okay. And there are good things about kale. So you want to have a variety. So you shouldn't have a raw kale salad every day. Maybe one day you cook it, the other day you have it raw. You know, you have to vary everything up so that you vary the types of nutrients, the amounts, and how you can absorb them. So that's a great question. And I think I might talk about that. Yeah, totally. So again, kind of as you go throughout the day, then at the end of the day, you know, your last meal, your dinner is maybe when you want to have a little bit more carbohydrates. So something like a protein, sweet potato, and a green vegetable, right? So I'm kind of flipping the switch on what popular suggestions are in terms of like when you should have your carbs. So I implore you, if you are having issues with your health, if you're trying to diet and exercise and you really feel like you're doing everything right, and you're eating the right foods, try this. Just kind of like flip when you have them. So instead of having more carbs in the beginning of the day, have them more at the end of the day. Exactly. So again, that's kind of a larger topic, but your brain and your body can use the glucose while you sleep, both to sleep fully and completely, but also to kind of replenish those lost stores. So eat exactly the same way you've been eating, but if you've been eating, you know, like oatmeal with fruit for breakfast and been having a dinner of just like chicken and vegetables, maybe flip that around. I mean, I had, for dinner tonight, I had breakfast tacos. I have almond meal tortillas, and I had eggs with turkey sausage and some romaine lettuce and some cheese and some sweet potatoes and some salsa. That's what my dinner was. I had breakfast for dinner. For breakfast this morning, I had 4% fat, which I'm super excited about, whole milk grass-fed yogurt with a little bit of raspberries, which are very low in carbohydrates, and some chia seeds. So I had a much higher protein and fat breakfast and a higher carbs at the end of the day. I'm anticipating I'm going to sleep like a baby. So if nobody else has any more questions, I've been kind of talking excessively about this topic. Yes, the 4% ciggies, I'm all about that. So personally, I am not anti-red meat or pork. I mean, again, that's a whole nother topic. I'm very big on quality and as well as quantity. So, you know, I always try to eat meats, but also fruits and vegetables of the highest quality I can find and I can afford. Again, I listen to myself. I tried to be a vegetarian for a while a few years ago because, yeah, grass-fed all the way. Just ethically, it was something that I wanted to try, and I just didn't feel good. And I wasn't eating like tofurkey or anything like that. I was eating, you know, grains and beans, and I just don't feel great when I eat those kinds of foods. And so it took a long time to figure that out. And again, it's always a work in progress, and you're going to be different than me. Exactly. So, you know, you always want to strive to have the highest quality ingredients that you can afford and that you can find in a combination that works for you and your lifestyle, right? So guys, thank you so much. I was really excited about this topic, so I hope you've learned some things tonight. If you do have any further questions, you can find me on social media, on Instagram at Liz Barnett, as well as Twitter, and it's LIZBARNET. I'm also on Facebook. My page is Liz Barnett Fitness, and you can also check out my website. It's lizbarnett.com. You can find my email address there. I'm happy to, you know, dedicate a future Periscope to any of your questions. Thanks, guys. Have a great rest of your night.